He said it loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Dad, this is embarrassing. You can't bring that thing into our home." I was standing in the doorway of my son's new house. They're just renovated, freshly decorated. Everything is beige and perfect house in Naperville, holding a wooden picture frame. My late wife Ruth's needlepoint was inside it. She had spent 4 months stitching it the year before she got sick. A cardinal sitting on a winter branch, red thread, white background, delicate as anything she ever made. My daughter-in-law Claire was looking at it the way you look at something that came out of a dumpster. "It clashes with everything," she said. "We had a designer come in. It took months to get this right." My son Daniel was standing just behind her. He didn't say a word. He used to have opinions. I remember when he was 12 and he cried, holding that very frame after his mother hung it in our kitchen. He said it was the prettiest thing he'd ever seen. That was before Claire. Before the consulting firm, the 6-figure salary, the address in the suburbs with the 3-car garage. "I just thought it might feel nice in here," I said. "Something of your mother's." Claire smiled the kind of smile that isn't one. "We'll find a place for it." We both knew she wouldn't. I drove home that evening with the frame on the passenger seat beside me, Ruth's cardinal facing the window, watching the highway pass. I talked to her sometimes on drives. Old habit. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine. "My name is Edward. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as an electrician, most of them running my own small company out of Rockford, Illinois. Ruth and I raised Daniel in a house on Elm Creek Road. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a garden she kept better than anyone on the block. When she died 6 years ago, it took a long time before that house felt like somewhere I actually lived again, and not just somewhere I waited. Daniel came back for the funeral and stayed 2 weeks. Claire couldn't come for most of it. Work commitments. I understood, I told him. I did, but there are things you file away without meaning to. After Ruth died, I went through her things slowly. Weeks of it. Some mornings I'd open a drawer and have to sit down on the floor. Her reading glasses. Her church directory with names crossed out in pencil. Because she always updated it herself. A tin of buttons she'd been collecting since before we were married. And in the closet in our bedroom, folded in a pillowcase, her other needlepoints, 6 of them she'd finished over the years and never gotten around to framing. I had them all framed. A quilt shop in town. Woman named Loretta. She did beautiful work. I kept one in the living room, gave 2 to Ruth's sister in Ohio, and I'd been holding on to one for Daniel's house, waiting for the right time. I should have kept waiting longer. The year after they moved into the Naperville house, things shifted. Nothing I could name all at once. More a collection of small things. Christmas plans changed at the last minute because Claire's parents were coming from Phoenix. Daniel stopped calling on Sundays. When I visited, I noticed a guest room that used to have a crib. They'd been talking about kids, had become a home office. I didn't ask. Then, in March, Daniel called. He didn't open with hello. He said, "Dad, I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else." I sat down. Claire was pregnant. 14 weeks. They'd been waiting to make sure everything was stable. I told him I was happy. I was happy. That part was real and uncomplicated, and I held on to it. What came after was harder. "Claire wants to talk to you about some boundaries," Daniel said. "Around the baby. Just how we're going to do things. What kind of things. Just visit frequency. And she wants the nursery to be her space to manage. She has a vision for it." I said okay. I was reasonable. I told myself people have the right to run their own households. Over the next few months, I got a list, more or less, delivered in pieces. No unannounced visits. No bringing over old baby items of Daniel's. Apparently, I'd mentioned Ruth's handmade quilt that Daniel had slept under as an infant, and Claire had made clear she had a nursery theme and it didn't include patchwork. No using the nickname I'd had for Daniel since he was small. At least not around the baby. It was a lot of no's attached to things I hadn't even fully offered yet. I kept most of this to myself. I talked to Ruth's cardinal instead. My granddaughter was born in September, Lily Ruth. They'd used Ruth as the middle name, and I won't pretend that didn't undo me a little when I heard it. I sat in a hospital waiting room for 4 hours, and when Daniel came out and said, "She's here, Dad," I went to the men's room and cried where no one could see me. I was allowed 20 minutes with her that first day. For the first 2 years, I saw Lily mostly at scheduled visits, 4 to 6 weeks apart. Claire was organized about it. There was always a time and a duration and a reminder that Lily had a nap schedule. I followed everything. I brought small things, a stuffed animal, a board book, always cleared with Claire first. I read the same 2 books Lily would hand me over and I loved every minute of it. Then Claire went back to work and they needed childcare. Her mother, Patricia, flew in from Phoenix first. That lasted 6 weeks before there was apparently some conflict I wasn't told about. A woman from their neighborhood watched Lily for a while. Then that fell through. Then in April, Daniel called again. "Could you do Tuesdays and Thursdays?" he said. "Just 9 to 3. We'd pay you." I told him to keep the money. I started showing up Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8:50, which was the earliest I figured Claire would tolerate, and those became the best days of my week. Lily and I had a routine. We walked to the park 2 blocks over. We ate lunch at the kitchen table, and she always dropped exactly half her food on the floor and looked at me like it was a magic trick. I read to her. I taught her the names of birds. She called me Pop, which I hadn't asked for and hadn't expected, and which hit me somewhere so deep I didn't have a name for it. I kept Ruth's cardinal in my car. Sometimes, before I went in, I'd tell her about the day we were going to have. By the time Lily was 3, I was there 3 days a week. The arrangement had expanded naturally. I wasn't keeping score. But sometime around that 3rd year, something else started changing. Claire began treating me less like a grandfather and more like staff. Not cruelly, exactly, more like efficiently. There was a whiteboard in the kitchen with Lily's schedule written out. Snack time, screen time, activity time, rest time. One Tuesday, I let Lily stay at the park an extra 20 minutes because she was in the middle of collecting acorns and was very serious about it. And when we came back, Claire had already come home early and she was standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed. "The schedule exists for a reason," she said. She was happy, I said. She has a routine. Disrupting it affects her sleep. I said I understood. I came home and called my friend Harold, who I've known since we were both young men doing rough-in wiring on new construction, and I told him I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own son's life. Harold listened the way he always does, without interrupting, and then he said, "Eddie, you sure you're not just grieving Ruth and putting it somewhere it doesn't belong?" I thought about that for a long time. I still think about it. Maybe he was right about some of it. But not all of it. The moment everything changed started, of all places, at a birthday party. Lily turned 4 in October. Claire threw a party that belonged in a magazine. Custom balloon arch in mauve and gold. A cake from a bakery in Chicago that cost more than my first car payment. Little gift bags with personalized ribbon. 20 children and their parents in a backyard strung with lights. I brought Lily a wooden art set, paints and brushes and a small easel, and a card I'd written myself. I also brought, without thinking hard enough about the consequences, a framed photograph. It was Ruth holding Daniel the day he came home from the hospital. June 1981, Ruth in her robe, Daniel a red-faced bundle, both of them in the living room on Elm Creek Road. I'd had it reprinted and framed. Something simple. I thought Lily might like knowing her grandmother's face. Claire opened it when I handed it to Lily. She looked at it the way she looked at the needlepoint. "Thoughtful," she said, in a tone that meant the opposite, and set it aside on a table near the door without showing Lily. I think Lily noticed too, because she looked at the table and then up at me with those wide eyes she has. Ruth's eyes, honestly, and said, "What's that, Pop?" "That's your grandma, Ruth," I said. "She would have loved you very much." Claire put her hand on Lily's shoulder. "Come say hello to the Hendersons, sweetheart." And that was that. After the other parents cleared out and Daniel was breaking down tables in the backyard, I helped Claire carry things inside. She'd been pleasant all evening, organized, the perfect hostess. But when it was just the 2 of us in the kitchen for a moment, she said, without looking up from stacking plates, "Edward, I'd appreciate it if you didn't bring things from before into Lily's life without running it by us first." "Things from before," I said. "Old photos, old items." We're trying to give her a consistent environment. I looked at the framed photograph still sitting on the table by the door. That's her grandmother, I said. I know who it is. She stacked another plate. I just appreciate the communication. I drove home. The photograph was still on their table by the door. I don't know what happened to it after that. I started to understand some things in the weeks that followed. I thought about how Lily had never seen the house on Elm Creek Road. She never held any of Ruth's things. She knew her grandmother had existed. Daniel had told her in broad strokes, but she didn't know her. Didn't know what she sounded like when she laughed, which was loud and sudden and contagious. Didn't know she grew tomatoes every year and named each plant. Didn't know she used to leave notes in Daniel's lunch until he was in 8th grade and started being embarrassed about it. Claire was giving Lily a life with no past in it. Clean lines, no clutter. I understood it was her house. I understood it was her child. Hers and Daniel's both. But Ruth was in that child's middle name, and somewhere along the way that felt like it was becoming the only place she was allowed to exist. I didn't say any of this to Daniel. Every time I tried to approach it, he found a way to redirect. He wasn't unkind about it. He just maneuvered. He'd learned that from Claire. Or maybe it was always in him and I hadn't seen it. He loved Lily. I knew that. He loved me too in his way. But he had built a life that fit Claire's blueprint, and he wasn't going to tear out the walls. I kept showing up Tuesdays and Thursdays. I kept reading the board books. I kept learning the nap schedule. And every Tuesday morning before I went in, I sat in the car on their street, and I talked to Ruth's cardinal. In February I found the box. I was going through the storage room at the house on Elm Creek Road. I'd been meaning to for 2 years, kept putting it off. And in the back behind Daniel's old hockey gear and a box of National Geographics I'd had since 1987, I found a plastic bin I didn't recognize. Ruth's handwriting on the side in black marker, for later. I sat down on an old footstool and opened it. Inside was a collection of things Ruth had gathered over what looked like years. A small journal she'd kept while Daniel was in middle school. Entries about his Little League games and a funny thing he said at dinner, and what she'd made for his birthday. A sealed envelope with my name on it in her handwriting. 3 of Lily's ultrasound photos. Daniel must have sent them to her in those last months of her life. She'd been too sick to make it to the appointments. And at the bottom, wrapped in a dishcloth, a pocket watch. I knew the watch. It had been Ruth's father's, her dad Franklin, who'd worked for 30 years at a printing company in Milwaukee, and been a quiet and decent man who never raised his voice in his life. He'd left it to Ruth when he died, because she was the one who'd visited him every Sunday in the nursing home at the end. The watch had been broken as long as I knew it. Ruth always meant to have it fixed. She kept saying someday. I held it for a while. Then I put it in my pocket. The next Saturday, I drove down to a shop on Stape Street in Rockford that I'd passed 100 times over the years. A small place, easy to miss, with a hand-lettered sign in the window, clock and watch repair, established 1974. A bell above the door. The smell of machine oil and old wood. The man behind the counter was somewhere around my age, maybe older, with glasses pushed up on his forehead and a loop hanging around his neck. He looked at the watch without touching it first. "May I?" he said. I put it on the counter. He picked it up with a cloth, turned it, held it to the light. "The Illinois Watch Company," he said. 16 jewel, railroad grade. He looked up at me. "Do you know much about its history?" I told him what I knew. Franklin, Milwaukee, the printing company. He set the watch down gently and said, "Sir, I'm going to need to look at this more carefully. Can you leave it with me for a few days?" I said I could. "Just so you know," he said, "this isn't what people usually bring in for a cleaning." I asked him what he meant. He looked at me carefully. "There's an engraving on the case back I'd like to examine properly, and the movement may have been modified at some point. I don't want to speculate. Just leave it with me." I drove home not sure what to think. He called 4 days later. His name was Martin. He'd been repairing watches in that shop for 38 years. He told me to come in when I had a few minutes. There was no hurry, but he wanted to show me something in person. I went the next morning. He had the watch laid open on a cloth on the counter. The caseback was off, the movement exposed. He showed me first the engraving on the inside of the caseback, initials, and a date, 1923, which matched when Franklin would have been a young man, when the watch was likely first sold. Then he pointed to the movement. "Your father-in-law had this watch modified at some point," Martin said. "This isn't original to the case." He indicated a small compartment that had been worked into the interior, behind the movement, invisible unless you knew what you were looking for. This was custom work. Someone built this deliberately. Inside the compartment, folded very small, was a piece of paper. Martin had left it folded. He hadn't opened it. "That's yours," he said. I unfolded it with hands that weren't entirely steady. It was a handwritten letter from Franklin to Ruth, dated 1987, the year Daniel was born. "My Ruth, if you're reading this, you had the watch repaired, which means you finally got around to it, which means you're the same as you always were, and you waited until the moment was right. I put something aside for you years ago, when business was good. Your mother never knew. I want you to have it, and not your brother, because you are the one who shows up. You always showed up. Tell the man at the bank, Quiet Harbor, and give him this letter. He'll know what it means. I set it up in '79, and it's been growing ever since. It belongs to you and whatever family you make. I love you, girl. Dad." I read it twice. Then I looked up at Martin. He was watching me with the expression of a man who has learned over many years not to fill silence unnecessarily. "Is there a way to find out what this refers to?" I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "That would be a matter for a bank," he said. "But I'd take that letter somewhere reputable, sooner rather than later. I won't go through all of it because some of it is still difficult to talk about, and some of it involves details that are private. But I'll say this, Ruth never found out. Franklin had set up a trust account at a small community bank in Milwaukee in 1979 in Ruth's name, with instructions for it to transfer to her estate upon his death if she hadn't claimed it. He died in 1994. Ruth was named. The account had been sitting under estate administration for 6 years, then went to the state's unclaimed property division when no one came forward because no one knew the password or the account details. Ruth had the watch, but never had it repaired. The money sat untouched. It had grown to a little over $400,000. Ruth never got to use it. She never even knew it was there. I sat with that for a long time. I cried more than once. I thought about what she might have done with it. Probably something practical and quietly generous. College funds, a better roof. She always wanted to go to Ireland. Her grandmother was from Cork. Then I thought about Lily. I consulted an estate attorney in Rockford, a woman who had been handling wills and trusts in this county for 20 years, and who listened to the whole story without reacting and then asked me very precise questions. The process took several months, involved coordination with the state of Wisconsin, documentation of Ruth's death and her relationship to Franklin, and my standing as the spouse and executor of her estate. It wasn't simple, but it was clean. The money came to me as surviving spouse, as it should have. The day the transfer was complete, I drove to the shop on State Street. I brought Martin a tin of cookies Ruth's sister had made. Martha always baked when she was happy, and I'd called her after things settled, and she'd been happy, and I stood in his shop and thanked him. He waved it off. "I just fixed a watch," he said. "You did more than that," I said. He put his glasses back on his forehead and looked at me. "What are you going to do with it?" I told him I was going to put most of it in a trust for Lily. A real one, set up properly with my attorney in Ruth's name. Lily. Ruth. Educational expenses first. Then, whatever she needed after, with provisions that made it hers when she turned 25, and that couldn't be accessed or redirected by anyone else in the meantime. I'd also set aside a portion for Ruth's sister Martha, who'd taken care of Ruth in her last months in a way I could never fully repay. Martin nodded slowly. "And the rest?" he said. "Ireland," I said. "I'm going to go to Cork. Ruth always wanted to go." He smiled at that. First time I'd seen it. I told Daniel in person. I asked him to meet me for coffee at a diner we used to go to when he was in high school, on East State Street, and I told him the whole story from the beginning. The storage box, the watch, Franklin's letter. Martin. The trust. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, Dad, we didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. Neither did I. Claire's going to want to discuss the trust structure. I put my coffee cup down. I looked at my son. Daniel, I said, the trust is for Lily. It's already set up. It's in her grandmother's name. There's nothing to discuss. He looked uncomfortable. He looked for a moment, like he was about to say something Claire would have approved of, and then he looked at his hands. She's been asking about Grandma Ruth, he said quietly. I waited. She found a picture somewhere. I don't know where she got it. She carries it around and asks me questions. He looked up. I don't always know what to tell her. Tell her the truth, I said. Tell her she was a woman who showed up. Who always showed up. He nodded. He looked like the 12-year-old standing in our kitchen holding that needlepoint frame. Just for a second. Then it passed. I hung Ruth's cardinal in my living room, where it's been since I brought it back from their doorway. I look at it most mornings. I went to Cork in May. Ruth's grandmother had grown up in a village outside the city, a place called Inishain, and I drove out there on a cloudy afternoon with a rental car and no plan, and walked along the river and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she wasn't somewhere I'd lost, but somewhere I was still finding. I brought Lily a small stone from the riverbank. Green with a white stripe. She keeps it on her windowsill. I know because I've seen it there on Tuesdays. Claire doesn't keep a whiteboard in the kitchen anymore. I don't know when it came down. Things have shifted in small ways, gradually, the way things do when nobody wants to name what changed. She still runs a tight ship. That's who she is. But last month she asked me, carefully, if I had any more photographs of Ruth. She said Lily had been asking. I brought over a small album the following Tuesday. Nothing fancy, drugstore prints in a paper sleeve. Ruth in the garden. Ruth at Daniel's graduation. Ruth at the kitchen table on Elm Creek Road, laughing at something off camera, her hand over her mouth the way she always laughed when something caught her off guard. Lily sat in my lap for an hour, asking who everyone was and what they were doing. And was that really her dad with a funny haircut? And I said yes, that was really him. And she thought that was the greatest thing she'd ever heard. I looked at Ruth laughing in that photograph and I thought, there she is, still showing up. That's the only thing I know how to pass on. You keep showing up, even when the doors barely open, even when they look at the things you love like they're clutter. You hold on, and you wait, and you let the truth do what the truth eventually does. It finds its way out. I keep thinking about that storage bin. The way Ruth wrote "for later" on the side in black marker, like she already knew someone would need it eventually. She didn't know it would take this long. She didn't know she wouldn't be the one to open it, but she put it there anyway, and that tells you everything about who she was. I've lived long enough to understand that what we do quietly, without applause, without anyone watching, is what actually holds. Claire didn't throw out a photograph because she was cruel. She did it because she'd never been taught to see what wasn't shiny. That's not wickedness. That's a kind of poverty. The things she valued were things you could price and display. The things Ruth valued were things you could only understand by paying attention over years. There's a cost to that kind of blindness, and it doesn't always announce itself right away, but it comes due. That's not fate or punishment. That's just how it works. When you treat people's history like clutter, you end up raising a child who doesn't know where she came from. And eventually that child, your own child, finds a photograph and carries it around asking questions you don't have answers to. Lily didn't find that picture of Ruth by accident. She found it because something in her was already looking. What I had to learn, and I'm still learning it, I won't pretend otherwise, is that showing up quietly, without forcing, without demanding to be acknowledged, is not the same as being passive. It takes more out of you than fighting does. Every Tuesday morning when I sat in that car and talked to a cardinal in a frame before going inside, that was a choice. Every time I followed the schedule and didn't say what I was actually thinking, that was a choice. Not weakness. Discipline, the kind that comes from knowing what you're actually there for. The watch was already doing what it was always supposed to do. It was just waiting for someone patient enough to bring it in. Franklin built that compartment and wrote that letter in 1987 and trusted that the right person would find it at the right time. He bet on Ruth's character, and he was right, even if the timing didn't work out the way he planned. That's the kind of thinking I want to pass on to Lily. Not the money, the thinking. You prepare carefully, you trust the people worth trusting, and you leave things in good enough shape that the truth can survive you. Lily has Ruth's eyes and Ruth's laugh, and she keeps a river stone from cork on her windowsill. She's 4 years old and she already asks the right questions. I don't know what kind of woman she'll grow into, but I know she's going to know where she came from. I'm going to make sure of that. Not by forcing it. By showing up. By being the kind of person she can come back to when she needs to understand something about herself. That's the only legacy I know how to leave. You stay. You hold on to the things that matter even when someone looks at them like they're clutter, and you trust that one day the people you love will be ready to see what you are holding.